on Dairyland Frights, the podcast that carries everything mysterious, creepy, and spooky in the Midwest, we have a special guest with me, Mike Huberty from American Ghost Walks. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Pretty good, John. Thanks for having us on. My name is Mike Huberty. I am the owner of American Ghost Walks, and we are a haunted history tour company.
Yes. I saw that. And you guys are, so I understand this correctly, you're the owner.
Right.
You're like all over the country, though. You're like in different states. Is that correct?
Yes. So it started out. So interestingly enough, I've always been into ghosts and the paranormal. Growing up, it was always exciting whenever they would have some kind of real paranormal activity on TV. And my sister was really into. My sister's 7 years older than me, and she was always into it, always interested in it. And I remember getting excited when I was a little kid, and you would see, John Davidson and Kathy Lee Crosby and Fran Tarkenton on That's Incredible talking about like the haunted Toys R Us in California, or there was a werewolf in England.
Oh, right.
And my mom used to have us listen to, the Chicago ghost hunter, Richard Crowe, when he was on WGN.
Oh, sure.
And we used to listen to him in the early 80s a lot. And he was always one of our favorites, learning about Chicago history and ghost stories. And we grew up in a small town called Big Bend, which is like a suburb of Milwaukee near Waukesha. And,
sure.
And so just always interested in that. And then I get to be about 12 years old. And what do you see in the local news is this haunting in Horicon. And this is before it went to Unsolved Mysteries, and you had the haunting of the Tallman House, and the TV sketch artists that would normally do the sketches of the courtroom trials. When they wouldn't allow cameras in the courtroom, they'd only allow sketch artists in the courtroom, and so the TV stations would have somebody go in there and they would draw from the courtroom. They were drawing the stuff like, the haunted things from the story of the Tallman House in Horicon, Wisconsin, and the haunted bunk bed, and all that kind of stuff. And then a couple years after that, on the local news is Linda Godfrey and the Beast of Bray Road. When you get to December 1991, and then the Beast of Bray Road story launches in the Elkhorn newspaper that Linda Godfrey was a cartoonist on, and so we had ghosts on the local news, werewolves on the local news. Yeah. So being always interested in the real stories, I love horror movies and like everybody, but being always interested in the real stories. You had growing up in southeastern Wisconsin in the late 80s. We had, it was, the newscasters would talk about it. Like they'd be like, okay, there's a werewolf in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Now it's going to rain tomorrow. Like that, now the weather. And so growing up, you kind of get that. And so, and me and my sister were always interested in ghost tours. We eventually did take Richard Crowe's ghost tour in Chicago. Whenever we go on family vacations, we would take ghost tours and just really be interested in it and into it. And then in 2008, my sister started a ghost tour in Milwaukee. So it was the first ghost tour in Milwaukee, the original. Nice. She was a school teacher, and then she would do that over the summer to make a little extra money. And I, in 2010, I'm playing, I have a band called Sunspot. We play a lot of paranormally inspired songs and stuff, but, and so my band was, so summer 2010, I didn't have a job. I was on tour with the band. I came home at the end of the summer and I was like, I have no way to make any money. Like, what am I going to do? And, because the tour is over, where we make some money. And so, my sister said, you should start a ghost tour in Madison. Halloween's coming up. And so the first thing I did was I said, okay. And then I went out, I walked down to the Capitol Square, and I knew that the Great Dane pub had some ghost stories. And so I just walked in there, I ordered a beer, and I asked the waitress, I said, hey, this might sound weird, but I heard that the Great Dane is haunted. What can you tell me about it? And she looks at me and smiles and says, well, I've seen 2 ghosts here, but you should really talk to the manager because she's seen like 4.
Nice.
And that's it. And that's what I started doing. And I started going around different places in the Capitol Square, and I'd ask their ghost stories. Then I'd look at the history of the building and write about the people, the experiences that people have had in the building. We start there. And then it goes to how does that connect to the history of the building? Then how does the history of the building connect to the history of the town? And then what was going on in the world at that time to connect that all together. And so I wrote a Madison Ghost Tour, and then I performed it for the first year. And, I did, I worked to support myself with it. And then things kind of, grew from there, doing it.
Yeah, that is awesome, Mike, because that to me is what all paranormal people start out with. Like for myself, one of the things I saw from my mom one time was reading a book on the Summer Wind Mansion. And that's in Wisconsin. So she was like, so she was like reading this book, and I was about, I don't know, like 10 years old. And I said, "Hey, Mom, what is that?" And my mom goes, "Oh, it's a really interesting story about these people who lived in this mansion, and it's cursed." And, and I'm like, that's it. That is so cool.
Right.
That's something I'm really interested in. And the other thing too is I always felt there was like paranormal around me. Like I'd be places and I'd be like, wow, there's just something weird about this house. Where you get those feelings and everything. And it wasn't until I was in high school where I had my first paranormal experience. I was at my grandma's house, and she had one of those like creaky old Iowa farmhouses, and, it's creepy too. And I was getting ready in the morning to leave with my mom and my sister, ready to leave. And I hear these footsteps coming down stairs. And again, this is an old creaky farmhouse, and it happened all the time. Grandma was up early and all that good stuff.
Sure.
And then the door opens, and I'm like, "Hey, Grandma," and there's nobody there. And I go, whoa, what's going on? So Grandma didn't believe in ghosts. Grandma was like, "Oh, I don't know what that is. It's probably the wind or something." But then I was just hooked. I was just like, "Oh my God, I got to study this and everything." And then I just read all these ghost books. I've been on like 12 ghost tours, including your own. I've been to one of my favorite places, Savannah, Georgia, where people in Savannah, Georgia, they're like, "Oh, sugar, everything is haunted here." It's like it's like you go into the bathroom of like a Sonic drive-in, get some food, and they're like, "That's haunted." And I'm like, "What?" Like, this is ridiculous. And I went on these tours and also have been in numerous shut-ins. The funny thing is, Mike, is I think ghosts know I want to see them so much, they avoid me. Because I haven't had a lot of paranormal experiences, but when I've spoken to people, they're always open up about a paranormal experience and everything. And I'm going to tell you a really funny story really quickly, that when I was a manager, I was a manager at this retail store. Okay. And I made no bones about it that I was in the paranormal. So one day, one of my employees comes to me and she's like, "John, you need to help me." And I'm thinking, uh-oh, is she pregnant or something? Hey, let me stay out of this. And she's going, "There was something really stupid. We took a Ouija board to a cemetery and we were playing with it. And then we all got scared and we ran." And I went, "Tell me you place the planchette over goodbye." And she goes, "No." And I go, uh-oh. And so here's the thing, like 2 weeks later, her mom comes in and her mom is like, "John, okay, you got to help us." I'm like, "What is going on here?" She's saying, "We're starting to see shadows. We're starting to have all these weird feelings in our house. And please help us." So I go, "Okay, you need to go back to the cemetery and you need to get the Ouija board and just hit goodbye and just get rid of that thing, burn it." So they go to the cemetery, and guess what? The groundskeeper had ran over it. So they totally destroyed the Ouija board. totally ripped it up under his lawnmower. So I said, this is what you need to do. You need to go get a new Ouija board, go out there and everything. And they're trying to sucker me into it. They're like, hey, John, why don't you do it? I'm like, nope.
Right.
And so eventually, I guess they went back and hit goodbye and everything like that. But that's kind of like with me. People will come up to me, when I'm in the paranormal, they're like, oh, let me tell you this story, John. Let me tell you this. But like I said, I've been on a number of ghost walks, including Madison. So I'm very familiar with it. Great. And the great thing is, Mike, about the Midwest, there is so much hauntings and so much, like you said, Beast of Bray Road, all these different things. We've had two of the biggest serial killers in the United States, and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein. It's like
certainly a couple of the most influential. Yeah. Well, yeah. And just going to that. So, when I was in high school, I went to a high school called Mukwonago High School, which was, a few miles outside of Milwaukee. You go down Highway 43 out of Milwaukee when you're going, south, and then that's where you run into Mukwonago, and it's only a few miles down from the Elkhorn exit, with the Beast of Bray Road. You get off and you go on Bray Road. Okay, so let's fast forward. So if the Beast of Bray Road, that's comes out last week of 1991. So like December 30th, 1991, it comes out in the Elkhorn paper. And when I was in high school, we would do some things called Fright Nights, where we would go investigate some kind of local legend. We get a bunch of people. It was, a good way, as a nice way to have like a group date. Like maybe you bring some, guys, bring a couple of girls that you would like, or they'd be like, hey, let's, go out and try something adventurous together, kind of.
Love it.
And so, we went on a lot of those different ones, and a lot of them turned out bust, but we go to this place in Mukwonago, and I remember coming off. It's right off the freeway exit, and it's all gone now because now that there's a medical center there. But this is 30 years ago when it was much less developed. And you come off the freeway, and then you're going down into the town, and there's a field to the right. And now the field, obviously that's where the medical center is, but it used to be just an old farm field. And there's a farmhouse, maybe a couple hundred yards from the road, that's burnt out. And it was there for decades. It was there for decades.
Sure.
And so I remember my sister, when I was a kid, we were driving to Mukwonago for some reason. And my sister told me, she goes, okay, you know where that is? They call that place the Gates of Hell. And I heard that the older kids do the Ouija board there. Oh. Funny enough, she has no recollection of telling me that. She's like, I never told you that. Cool. And I'm like, I just made it up. Maybe she was trying to scare me. I don't know. But now fast forward to like you were 17 years old. And one of our Fright Nights, we're like, okay, this is maybe 94, I think, maybe the fall of 1994. And I'm like, we got to go to the Ouija board in this place called the Gates of Hell. And everybody knew what I was talking about because they saw this burned out farmhouse that you could see from the road. Yeah. And it was like, okay, let's go there. So I get a group, maybe I would say 12 people, half guys, half girls. And we all, drive out. There's a park and ride not too far from there. So we all park in the park and ride and then trudge out on a, late September night, 9:00 or whatever. It's dark out.
Yeah.
And we get to the abandoned farmhouse. And it's all, it's obviously, people have messed around with it. There's some graffiti. There's just crap everywhere. And so we set the Ouija board down. And it's me and a friend of mine who eventually I dated her for a long time. But this is kind of before, it all kind of happened. And we sit down at the Ouija board. And then one of my other friends walks up and goes, here, use this as an antenna. And he throws a bone down on the Ouija board. Okay. I'm like, what? He goes, bones. They're all over the walls. They're all inside the walls here. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Oh my God.
So we're looking in, and there were hundreds of animal bones stuffed inside the walls of the building.
Wow.
And I mean, we didn't get any weird Ouija board stuff. And really, I thought I was like, I wanted to see a ghost or have a paranormal experience. I thought this was bored farm kids who like, they read some kind of Santeria book or something, and they just, decided to perform some kind of sacrifice. So, I didn't think about it. I was at this place where people was said to do, occult activity, that I was there to do occult activity. And there were bones, there were animal bones stuffed in the walls. And I just thought, oh, these bored farm kids just doing something. So I'm like, this is silly, right? Okay. Well, when you read the, on the Hunt for the Wisconsin Werewolf, the Beast of Bray Road book, when Linda Godfrey talks to the Walworth County Animal Control Officer, he talks about finding ditches, like culverts, where, the driveway meets the road, and a lot of the suburban houses, they have that little dip there so that the rain doesn't just flood the road. But he talked about finding hundreds of animal bones like stuffed into some of these ditches. Wow. And he reiterates that in the Bray Road Beast, the Small Town Monsters film that came out about 4 or 5 years ago. And he gets interviewed again. And he says, we discovered these like weird mass animal burial pits. And they try to connect that obviously with occult activity going on, to maybe maybe the Beast of Bray Road is not a cryptid. Maybe it's something conjured, through a dark ritual and through, a sacrifice of these animals. And it wasn't until it wasn't until I thought about that years later that I was like, oh yeah, this is just a few miles from Bray Road. Really just a few miles. Like it's like two interstate exits up from Bray Road, from where you get off to get there. And we had a site of a mass animal sacrifice, or at least some kind of thing where they're shoving bones in the walls. And you're just saying, and I didn't think about that. I'm like, I just thought that, I'm like, this is lame. I want to see a ghost. I don't care about bones. And then later on, I'm like, oh, what kind of stuff was going on around there? What were people doing? And
it's
so when you said that the Midwest is full of these kind of things, and it's funny you mentioned Summerwind, because just today, my son's preschool teacher told my wife, she's like, oh, make sure you tell your husband that I'm going to go do a paranormal investigation of Summerwind coming up. And I thought that was, and I'm like, awesome. I'm jealous. Like, I want to go out there too. But there's so much, and saying that the Midwest. So, I remember growing up, and like I said, I was always interested in the real paranormal stories that sometimes the early reality shows would have, Inside Edition, Current Affair, things like that. And
Unsolved Mysteries.
Right. Of course. Robert Stack and his, in his trench coat.
And the fog coming through.
Oh, it's really, really is beautiful. Really is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
I love that kind of stuff. And the idea that there are things in the world that we don't understand. That's Shakespeare, right? There's more to heaven and earth, Horatio, than dreamt of in your philosophy. And to kind of to explore that, and in the Midwest, because all the movies are made in the production centers, obviously, Chicago's a production center, but it's not like Los Angeles or New York. So when you're here, you watch the movies and you watch TV, you're like, okay, well, all the good stuff happens in LA. All the good stuff happens in New York. Yeah. In the Midwest, just fly over country and it's boring. Part of what makes working on these tours exciting and doing the research and putting it together is that we get to show people how interesting their towns are, or if they're visiting the Midwest, the towns that they're visiting are. And so that to me is a real treat, where you're like, well, I did, even in Madison. So I came to Madison for college in 1995. And then I moved around a little bit for some jobs, and when my wife's first job after law school and stuff. But then I always came back here to Madison because I love it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until I was doing the research to create the Madison Ghost Walk that I started appreciating the place more. When I started paying attention to the history, that wasn't just the college, that I was used to, but I started learning about the history and the buildings and the people that were here before us and their legends and their stories. And then going back to some, Indian stories and things, when we talk about the lake monster and everything and Bajo, we have here in Madison, but it's learning, connecting those dots makes you feel closer to a place. Really, it made me feel much closer to Madison. And when I'm doing research on a place, it makes me feel much closer. So if we can help people do that who come to town, whatever town it is in the Midwest, because we have tours in Milwaukee, Waukesha, Madison, Bayfield, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva. We've got a lot of this state covered. Yeah. If we can make people feel like, oh, I did not realize that Milwaukee was cool. I didn't know about these gangs in the Third Ward in the 1850s. I did, or that Wisconsin Dells was, Byron Kilborn, the one of the guys that started Milwaukee. He's up in the Wisconsin Dells and he makes a shady deal to get the Wisconsin Dells to become the place where the railroad crosses the river, right? And then destroys the nearby town that everybody thought was gonna have it. And you're like, well, that's like Wisconsin Dells was formed on a metaphorical murder of a different city.
That's crazy, right? You don't think about that. The other thing, Mike, really quickly is with Madison too, people forget like Camp Randall. So they think of the Wisconsin Badgers and they go Camp Randall, but they don't realize that was a real camp and Civil War soldiers were there and it was part of a prison, and people don't think about that. One of the things really quickly, I did just recently an episode on Dairyland Frights of Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. And under that zoo are like 15,000 bones, remains of people still there, where people say they'll be like out walking their dog and the dog will come with like a human bone, and they'll be like, because they never moved the bodies. They just built over top of it and they just went, that's what the Midwest is.
They were going to move the bodies. And then the Great Chicago Fire happened.
Yeah.
And so, we run a Lincoln Park ghost hunt 4 nights a week where we do a paranormal investigation, in Lincoln Park.
I love that.
And it's really fun. It's really fun, the kind of, evidence people get, but it's also, you learn a ton about the history of Chicago. You end up at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre site. Because that's, it's very close. And so the history that's just contained in that park, in that like 1.5 mile walk, there's just a ton of, Midwestern history, Chicago history. And then that's all wrapped into the fact that there's, 10-some thousand bodies, still that you're walking over that have no headstone.
Right. That's just, and people don't know about the Peshtigo fire. That was another one of our episodes. The Peshtigo fire was worse than the Great Chicago Fire because people didn't realize it just spread so quickly and people were being like burned alive. And it's this crazy thing. There's a memorial up there in Peshtigo where I've been up and I've looked at it and went, oh, that's a shame. Maybe some farms burned down or something. But when we started doing the research, we found out thousands of people died and it wiped out an entire city. And it was almost worse than the Chicago fire because nobody could do anything about it. There was no fire crews or anything. So it just spread and spread and spread. And
well, the death toll of the Peshtigo fire was much worse than the Great Chicago fire.
Yes, exactly.
Building damage was worse in Chicago, but in Peshtigo, there was what they call an inferno, like a fire tornado.
Yes.
Was happening and killing, murdering. It's just terrifying. That the idea that is terrifying. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the theories that the Great Peshtigo fire and the Chicago fire and the fires in Michigan that happened all on the same night. The theories that it was an asteroid or whatever, an asteroid that broke up and the burning pieces fell on one side of Lake Michigan, like Holland, Michigan, and then fell in Peshtigo and fell down to Chicago. That, and now scientists don't think, or historians, I don't know, but they don't think it's like a reasonable theory. They think more that there was a lot of droughts that summer, and there was fires the day before. They just happened. It just really happened that three notable places burnt at the same time, and obviously Peshtigo and Chicago are the most well known. But the idea that the asteroid is what caused it, that was all the way in the 1880s.
I never heard that one.
In the 1880s, people were theorizing. They're like, well, here's what we think happened. We think that, some pieces of meteor, whatever came in, fell in, and little bits and pieces flew down to Earth, and that, explosion or whatever is what caused the fires. I mean, but it was a bad drought that summer, and fires were popping up beforehand. It was just that night it ended up hitting places where people were living.
Yeah. So Mike,
I'm fascinated with that. And go ahead.
No, it's just fascinating, right, with all this stuff. So I'm going to do some quick fire questions, and then I want to get into some spooky stories or some great stories you've had on your ghost walks that you can share with our audience. So, all right, first one, Bigfoot or Beast of Bray Road?
Oh, Beast of Bray Road.
More scary, you think, or just you don't believe the hype in Bigfoot?
Oh, well, I mean, I think the idea that Bigfoot might be like an interdimensional being, I find interesting. The idea that Bigfoot might be a ghost of a former, like a former hominid, I think is interesting. Yeah. But the idea of Bigfoot as a flesh and blood cryptid, I know Lauren Coleman would excoriate me for this, but the idea of Bigfoot as a flesh and blood cryptid, I think, I don't buy it. If you want to say he's supernatural, flits in and out between our world and a different world, okay. But if Bigfoot's running around, I'd like to see his droppings.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Or something that we know he's there. So next question. Dark-eyed children showing up at your door, or disembodied voices you hear nightly that are children voices. Which is more scary? Dark-eyed children showing up or disembodied voices nightly at your house?
Disembodied voices nightly at my house. Because disembodied voices, I mean, the black-eyed children thing, that feels like an internet meme. That to me, get a picture of them. Everybody's got a cell phone. Right. Show me the picture of the black-eyed children. Show me the ring camera. Show me the ring camera of the black-eyed children, please. Yes. Now disembodied voices at night. I mean, that's a ton of poltergeist cases that start with the knocking. They start with the knocks, and over time, things start happening, knocks to things moving around till eventually a voice happens, and then the voice happens, and then there's some kind of physical manifestation that people can see. And so disembodied voices have been happening in poltergeist cases for thousands of years. And so I'm into that. Black-eyed children showing up on the ring camera, that's when I'll be into that.
Okay. So you've already done my Ouija board. You already said you've done a Ouija board, so I won't get into that.
Oh, yeah.
Be honest with me, have you ever screamed like a little girl when you've been really scared?
Oh, yeah. There's a place in Muskego, Wisconsin. And so Muskego is another small town outside of Milwaukee. And it's between Big Bend and Milwaukee when you're taking Hales Corners. I can't remember Forest Home Road. Taking Forest Home Road from Big Bend all the way to Milwaukee, you'll run through Muskego. And I remember one time my friend who had worked at a supper club in Muskego, he said, "Hey, have you ever heard about Haunchyville?" And this was about 25 years ago. He said this, and I'm like, "No." And what's that about? He goes, "Well, there's these, they say that there's this road in Muskego where there are these little houses where these people they call haunchies live, and they're like half-size people, or maybe they're dwarves.
Okay.
And they they hate full-size people. So when you come out there and you bother them, they throw rocks at you, and they've got a full-size guy that'll chase you out with a shotgun. And I'm like, that sounds weird. And he goes, well, the reason they call them the Haunchies is because there was a farmer that lived nearby. And one day they find the farmer hung in his own barn, and he's hung there that he killed himself. And he left a note written that said, "The Haunchies made me do it." And in the dirt of the barn floor, there were all these little footprints leading out of it. And so he said, sometimes people say they see the ghost of the farmer. And I'm like, well, we got to go to Haunchyville. So, I mean, we drive, this is summer of 1996, maybe. And either 96 or 97, but I'm putting my money on 96. And we drive out to Haunchyville. It's me, the same girl I did the Ouija board with a couple of years earlier. And then two other friends, one guy that worked at the Supper Club, and another friend. And we go down Mystic Road in Muskego, and we leave our cars and start going down. Now, we did see a stop sign or a yield sign or something that looked a little bit low to the ground. Right.
Okay.
But nothing weird, no little houses, no anything, just regular, a couple of houses in the distance. And it wasn't very developed.
Sure.
Now it's really developed with more houses and everything. And, 25 years ago, it wasn't. And so we're walking through, and then I hear what sounds like a pterodactyl, like and I just went, and I ran, left my girlfriend behind and everything. I'm like, you can save her. Right. And so I just heard that we all ran, but I ran the fastest, and I completely,
you ran the fastest.
Whatever masculine duty I should have had towards that poor girl, I abandoned. And so, I screamed like a little girl when I was investigating Haunchyville.
Okay, last question. Original Ghostbusters with Bill Murray or the remake? Which do you prefer?
I'm not going to dignify that with an answer.
I got it. Yes, the remake I was watching, to be honest with you, I have seen it, Mike, and I went, did someone lose a bet? Did someone be like, hey, you lost the bet, now remake Ghostbusters? I'm like, all right, fine.
Well, I think that everybody involved was very talented. I think Kate McKinnon, obviously, she's wonderful. And, and Kristen Wiig, I love everybody involved. Is very
Melissa
talented.
McCarthy, yeah,
funny. I like Leslie Jones. I mean, she's kind of got a one-note character, but that one character is pretty funny.
Yeah,
and so
very fun.
I like them all individually. I liked Bridesmaids. I've enjoyed a lot of their films, and Ghostbusters. I was like, okay, let's see what they got. And it was like whoever wrote the script, Paul Feig, he forgot to write a script.
Yeah.
And so he went in there. He's like, okay, I've got all these really funny people. I'm just going to let them do whatever they want instead of having a great story and a great idea. I mean, Bill Murray's cameo was embarrassing. It just a whole thing.
Yeah. Dan Aykroyd. Yeah.
I mean, no, Bill Murray's character dies. They kill him.
Right.
He dies. Yeah. And there are and that's where it completely leaves reality behind. Cause somebody died on your property. The police didn't show up. What? And at least in the original Ghostbusters, if somebody fell out a window and was kind of half murdered or whatever, the police would show, or maybe Walter Peck would show up with the EPA, but at least something would happen.
Walter Peck.
So, anyway, Ghostbusters 2016, I think they wasted a wonderful opportunity that they had to reinvigorate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you share with my audience, Mike, a couple, they can be spooky stories, they can be fun stories, or even a story where you went like, man, to this day, I don't get it. Like, what happened? So if you can use your great mind and let my audience know, that'd be awesome.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think of. I mean, even when we just talk about Madison, that I think are uncanny. And I always use them as examples of what I think of as really interesting. So there's classic stories of, the woman in white haunts this. And, you take something like, Taliesin in Spring Green, where, Frank Lloyd Wright had his wonderful property. And then there was that tragedy that happened where his, I don't think he was married to Mama Cheney yet, but but his girlfriend and her kids were murdered by the servant that worked there, and then now a woman in white haunts a certain area, and it's like, okay, that's a classic kind of story. But
yes,
what about the woman in white? Like, who's seen her? Like, can you tell me anybody who's actually had some kind of experience there? And something that I get excited about is when I get interviews with people and they tell me some kind of story, and then later on it's matched by someone else who doesn't know them.
Oh, right.
For example, so let's take an example in Madison.
Yes, please.
Majestic Theater, right? Gorgeous theater, built in 1906. So it's over 100 years old. It's this great vaudeville place for decades. Then it kind of runs into disrepair. It's a porn theater for a while. As the Barrymore was right by my house, as the Barrymore was too in the 1970s. And so like a lot of these beautiful movie houses that, were great in the early part of the 20th century. They eventually fall into disrepair and they're just used for skin flicks. And then later on, they're renovated into music venues. So first time I went to the Majestic was to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show in the 1990s. And they used to have
awesome.
Right. They used to have the Rocky Horror on every Saturday night at midnight. And love Rocky Horror. And so we went down and go watch it, have a great time. A few years later, I'm working on the Madison Ghost Tour. And by this time, the Oriental had shut down as a movie theater. Not the Oriental. That Oriental's in Milwaukee, different haunted theater. The Majestic in Madison. Majestic shut down for a while as a movie theater. It's reopened as like a VIP club with bottle service and everything for a while. 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
Then that shuts down again. And by this point, when I'm working on that, I don't even believe it had reopened as a music venue yet. So now we just had the Majestic Theater sitting there, derelict for several years. Right. And I put out a call, probably on the internet or in different places or maybe in the one ads or whatever, when I'm looking for ghost stories working on the tour. And I'm looking for things specifically around the Capitol Square because I wanted it to be a walking tour. And so I needed a route that people could do in 90 minutes to 2 hours, like the length of a movie, where, you wouldn't be like, I've been on ghost tours that go for 3 hours long. It's like, where's the bathroom, guys? I'm going to go on my pants.
Right. Exactly.
And so you need something. You try to create an experience for people that's fun, it's interesting, and it's comfortable. So it can't be a death march or whatever. It's got to be an easy walk. It's got to be long enough so you don't have to worry about a bathroom break. And it's got to be enough places where you feel like you've seen enough of the city to get a good idea of it. And so I put up my ads looking for, hey, anybody had a ghost story in this area? And I get a call from a guy who used to be the stage manager of Rocky Horror at the Majestic in the 90s. And I'm like, all right, let's talk to this guy. And he talks about the Majestic Theater. He's like, yeah. He goes, man, that place super haunted. In their dressing room he's like, they called it the green room, their dressing room. Yeah. Where they would get ready and they, because in Rocky Horror, to people who haven't seen it, they may have seen it on TV, but the movie theater experience was that there was a live cast in front of the screen who would act out the film while the film was going on. Yeah. And so you would, there's a part they get married, you throw rice. There was a part with squirt guns, depending on the theater. Some theaters allowed the squirt guns, some theaters didn't. Right. That you would just toss these things or do these things in the middle of the film at these certain points. And everybody would sing along the songs with modified lyrics and the whole deal. But a live cast would act out the movie in front of you. So there would be a group of people who had the movie memorized, and they would be acting out and do all the things and turn around and the scenes. It was really fun. And you see, he was the guy who kind of got everybody together and stage managed the cast for the Madison production of Rocky Horror. And he said that in the green room, there was a ghost there that wouldn't leave any of the girls alone. Like, he would hide their brushes, hide their makeup, kind of mess with their hair, like pull on their hair.
A little fresh.
And things.
Yeah.
And so their theory was that it was a spirit who had killed himself inside the Majestic Theater. He was an actor back when it was a vaudeville theater 100 years ago.
Oh, sure.
And so the actor had killed himself inside the theater over a broken heart, and that's why he was annoying the girls. And they called him Joe.
Oh, okay.
I was not able to find any. I mean, usually suicides don't get in the newspaper anyway.
Right.
But I wasn't able to actually, verify anything about this actor that killed himself. But it's an interesting story that they would tell. And they were definitely having paranormal experiences there. Okay. He says the last night of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, right before the Majestic closed down as a theater, and I think, in 2000 or whatever is when it closed down for the first time. He is walking out of the green room before the show starts. And he hears a whisper in his ear, "Good luck with the show." And there's nobody there. And he's like, "I didn't go back." Oh. He's like, that was the last time I stepped foot in that green room.
I'm going.
Okay, fast forward. Okay, so I was designing the Madison Ghost Walk in 2010. And 2013, I'm having a music conference in Chicago. And like I said before, I play in a band, sunspotmusic.com, Dairyland Frights fans. But
thank you.
So I'm at this music conference and I'm hanging out with one of the interns at the Majestic. And everybody's just talking, we're having beers, talking about music and music industry and all that kind of stuff. And our favorite bands. And she asked me, she goes, "Hey, you're into ghost stories, right?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." And she says, "Okay, what can you tell me about the Majestic?" And I said, "Okay, why don't you tell me what you know first? Because, you work there."
Yeah.
She goes, "Well, I don't know too much, but I tell you, every time I'm in the women's bathroom, I feel something weird, like somebody's grabbing at me, or I'm feeling being watched, or it's a weird."
Yeah.
And the other ladies had that same kind of experience in the bathroom. So she goes, we don't like the women's bathroom at the Majestic." I'm like, that's interesting, because between the 1990s and the 2010s, when it reopened as a music venue, the area that used to be the dressing room, the green room, is under the stage. And so that's what they turned into the bathrooms under the stage. So the very same room that the people had the experience in Rocky Horror, where Joe was annoying the girls, fast forward 20 years, and now it's a girl's bathroom. Now it's not the dressing room. Now it's been remodeled and all those kind of things. People are having the exact same experiences in the exact same space, decades apart, without even knowing the story of Joe or the kind of legend that had kind of happened in the meantime.
Love it.
And so to me, that's like, okay, now that's interesting, because people from different times who have the same experiences in the same place. And so that one is one of my favorites in Madison, at least, of people having similar experiences.
Yes.
Let's fast. You were talking about the Civil War before, and you were talking about Camp Randall as a prisoner of war camp, and it was not a prisoner of war camp for very long.
No,
because like dysentery, like the Oregon Trail or whatever, like a dysentery went through the camp, and it killed over a couple hundred of Confederate soldiers, which is why we have Confederate Rest Cemetery here, the northernmost. Why would we have a Confederate cemetery in Wisconsin? Is because
exactly.
We can, and the thing is, when the higher ups in the Union Army, like when I don't know if it was a general or whatever, came through, And after a couple of months and, heard the reports that the conditions at Camp Randall were terrible, they discontinued it as a camp and they moved everybody to a camp closer to Chicago because it just, the conditions here as a prisoner of war camp in Madison were atrocious. And a lot of people died. And so people will still see Confederate soldiers in Camp Randall. Like they will see ghosts of Confederate soldiers in Camp Randall.
Yes.
But most interestingly to me is that I was doing a podcast with, Joe's got a show called The Insane Asylum. It's another Madison like paranormal podcast. And
sure.
And so, and this was a couple years ago, and he used to work in security at the Rayovac factory in Madison. So Rayovac used to be at the corner of like Winnebago and East Washington in Madison.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And now it's they still call it Union Corners. And the reason they call it Union Corners is because the train came through there, and that's where people would get on to go to the front for battle. Like, so all the soldiers from Wisconsin, whatever, that if you were drafted or if you were conscripted into the Union force, you would come to this place to get on the train, and that's where you would go to where the battles were happening. And so they call it Union Corners. Well, the Rayovac factory was there for a long time. And so Joe was telling me, he's like, I was security there, and I used to have a security guard. She came up to me and she told me she saw a Civil War soldier. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he tells me about that and I'm like, well, that's Union Corners, right? He's like, yeah, they call it Union Corners. And he thought it had to do with like a labor union. Well, it's Madison.
Union,
most things have to do with a labor union, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, no. It had to do with Civil War soldiers. So the fact that, your security guard or whatever saw a Civil War soldier, not realizing, because he's like, what the hell would a Civil War soldier be doing here? Not realizing that, we had a POW camp, that that Wisconsin, Madison was the place where people would get on the train to go. So there were thousands of Civil War soldiers, hundreds of Confederates at least, and thousands of Union soldiers who had passed through that place. So seeing one walking around the Rayovac factory is not that, as a ghost person, you're like, well, of course, there used to be Union soldiers. But he was like, isn't that crazy that they saw Confederates? I'm like, no, it's not crazy. And so what I like about that, though, is that you have people who are not bringing a preconceived notion to the story. They're just like, isn't that weird? And you're like, yeah, not really. But the fact that you didn't know about it, and you still saw something, makes it interesting to me, because that's the kind of thing where we're not, as ghost people, and who are interested in this kind of thing. A lot of times we'll know all about the stories before we go to a place. We'll know the legends. There's been decades of people going to the place who have left some kind of energetic, and I know I'm talking out of my ASS now when I say that have left some kind of energetic imprint. We're leaving the realm of science and going into the realm of theory very quickly. And they've left some kind of energy in a place, and their thought, and they're expecting to see something, and they're hoping to see something, and all that kind of thing. In we talk about Summer Wind, or you talk about any of these places that have had hundreds of paranormal investigations, or night after night of paranormal investigation. Like, are you seeing are you seeing the disembodied spirit of somebody who lived there at one time, or are you seeing tulpa created by thousands of people that have sat there and imagined it over the course of decades?
Yes.
So when you have those situations where people see the same thing completely unrelated, that's when I'm like, okay, that's cool. Now, what is it? Is it a recording? Is it the stone tape? Is it, a place where you have some kind of, some imprint is left, like the recording, like the grooves in a record, the right moment, the grooves are played, and then you see this played out before you, the recording. Are you seeing a disembodied spirit, or are you seeing a thought form created by all the expectations of people over the years? And so that when you put those things all together, it's just an interesting way to look at the world, look at life, and or look at the afterlife. And so that to me is what I'm most fascinated by, because I've had some, I've had some scary experiences and things like that too. But I think that when you get a bunch of people seeing the same thing at the same time, that's when, like either it's a mass hallucination, or there's something that you guys all saw. And if it's a mass hallucination where 4 people all see the same thing that's not actually there, well, that's paranormal too, because that's non-physical communication. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing for me, Mike, too, what I'm really interested in, like you said, tulpas, which I'm absolutely fascinated. I'm also fascinated with doppelgangers, as well as I'm fascinated with people who, like you said, aren't really used to the paranormal and what's going on and everything like that. Like you said, that's the most original, where, like I said, my grandma was, I've heard those noises before, whatever.
Sure.
But she's heard them. I've heard them. And the biggest thing I always tell people who come to me and they'll ask me questions about it, and they'll be like, what's the difference between an intelligent haunting and just a residual haunting? And there's some other hauntings in there too. So one of the things is, have you ever, because just really quickly, our audiences are smart, but intelligent haunting, again, is where like something happens, where something gets moved, where there's some type of communication, maybe something writing, something like that. And a residual haunting is like a movie clip. Like every day at 8:00, you see the white lady walk down the steps. My question to you is, have you seen either one of them? Have you seen an intelligent haunting? Have you seen a residual haunting? Just kind of curious.
Intelligent haunting, I'm not sure. We've had some weird Ouija board stuff when talking things, and the idea that an intelligent haunting would have to be something where you ask a question and it reacts.
Exactly, that too.
To asking your question. And so if you ask a question and all of a sudden it reacts with an answer, well, now you're dealing with something that can answer your question, which is intelligent. Whereas, I can talk, you can't talk at a DVD and it'll just replay the same thing. Residual haunting. We were my band was playing at a bar in Wausau, Wisconsin called the Fillmore. And the Fillmore, it's right by the Grand Theater, which is a ton of hauntings in Wausau. And so we're playing at this place called the Fillmore, really nice venue. But we're hanging out at the bar, and the bartender says, like, you got to see the ghost at like 1:00 in the morning. I'm like, what's that? She goes, oh yeah, it flashes the lights and stuff. And this happens every time. Yeah. I'm like, okay. And so this was like at 8:00 because we're kind of bored. We're waiting to go on. And we're bored. We're waiting to go on. And you kind of just talk to the people who are hanging out. So I talked to the bartender, and then I asked if it was haunted. And she goes, that's when she said, oh yeah, the ghost comes at 1:00 in the morning, and kind of just, I don't know, the power gets funky and stuff at the same time every night. All right. And we play the show. We have a bunch of weird things happen while we're setting up for the show, like a piece of metal falls from the ceiling. The sound person, she had said that she had seen a whole bunch of stuff up there, and like, so that's what we were kind of like, oh yeah, it's haunted, and the sound person sees this and all these kind of things. Yeah. And then we're taking a break. We go up and somebody wants to buy us shots, and they had like Sunspot shots. They had shots named after us that night, like a special kind of like vodka and orange juice and a whole bunch of stuff. Right. So like, I'll buy you some shots. I'm like, yeah, we should buy the ones named after our band. And then you should buy some CDs. And so, we're doing the shots, and it's maybe 12:58, and then talking and stuff. And then all of a sudden, like the lights flash and the power gets funky. Like one of our amps resets on stage and everything. And, I look at the clock. I'm like, oh, it's 1. And then I remember, because this is somebody told me 5 hours before that the power always shifts and acts funny at the same time every night. And I just experienced it and didn't realize it at the time. Like, oh, that's weird. And then I remember that somebody told me about it a few hours beforehand. And so that's the only time I've seen a residual haunting where the same thing seemed to play. I mean, what could that be where it would happen at the same time every night? Like what from the power company? Is there some kind of faulty wiring that something happens every 20 reliably every 24 hours? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that was their experience at that particular establishment.
So then, being in a band, you're familiar with the Eagle Ballroom and the Rave, correct? Has your band ever played there, or have you?
Yes,
have you ever? Oh, awesome!
Not the Eagles Ball. We're not big enough to play at the Eagles Ballroom, but we've played in the Rave Bar. So.
Yes, and you're familiar with all the ghostly stories there and all the band stuff. Any experience there, really quick?
Well, my sister just went on there. They did a big haunted thing over Christmas, and they let people down to see the pool. They let people down to see the pool.
Yes, that's right.
And so over Christmas, she went in there, and we have a whole article on the website, AmericanGhostWalks.com, about, the haunted stories of the rave. And in particular, like she got to see the pool where somebody died and they said was really haunted and all those kind of things. And she even found the newspaper clipping of the person that passed away down there. But I think my favorite story about the Eagles Ballroom is that, Buddy Holly played there a couple of dates before the plane went down in Clear Lake, Iowa. That it killed him. It killed the Big Bopper. Big Bopper, Chantilly Lace and a Pretty Face. You recognize the song out there. And then Richie Valens, the La Bamba. Obviously La Bamba, the movie was famous, and then the song La Bamba. You've all heard it. And that people would talk about. They'd be playing at the Eagles Ballroom, and they'd get on stage, and they would look, and in the curtains in the wings, they would see a figure with the glasses, and he would kind of give them a nod, give them a smile. Yeah. And so that Buddy Holly still walks the stage of the Eagles Ballroom in Milwaukee. That's what I always thought that was the most interesting story about it. Beyond that, I mean, I also heard the place was mobbed up for a long time. So I'm sure there's some kind of, true crime there that ended up as a ghost story. Yeah.
Yeah. So last question.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you like to play with, living or dead, in your band? Who would you like to rock out with? It could be Mozart if you want. It could be Mozart if you want to see like Mozart, Beethoven. Sure, go ahead.
No, I think the most fun would be to write a song with Jim Steinman, who wrote all the Meatloaf tracks. He did a lot of. He worked with the Sisters of Mercy. He wrote Bonnie Tyler's, all the songs off the, Holding Out for a Hero and things like that. And Jim Steinman and all the Meatloaf classics. And then, I think I would have loved to have worked with him because I think the way he puts together like a 9-minute opus of all these different kind of rock things, would have been a dream. So when he died, I was like, well, I guess I'm never going to fulfill that dream. But he's the kind of guy that I would have loved to have tried to, written a song with at some time.
So did he do Paradise by the Dashboard Light? Was he one of the writers on that?
Yeah. So he wrote that whole album. He wrote Bad Out of Hell and Bad Out of Hell too.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, hey, Mike, I could talk to you for hours because this is awesome. Fun. So why don't I ask you now to kind of tell people, how do they schedule a tour with American Ghost Walks? Where do they find you? Give us all the information so we can take this tour and have a blast.
So American Ghost Walks, let me just list off some of the cities really quick. We're in over 20 cities across the country. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Stillwater, Minnesota, Red Wing, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Waukesha, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Madison, Bayfield, Chicago, we have like 4 or 5 tours in Chicago, including Devil in the White City. So we do like a true crime as well as haunted history, Naperville, Aurora, Woodstock. We even do Lake County and the area north of the city. And so we kind of the upper Midwest. So the biggest cities in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Illinois, we have covered. Then going coastal Maine. If you guys get up to the East Coast, we got 4 cities on coastal Maine: Bar Harbor, Booth Bay Harbor, Kennebunkport. You can find out what the Bushes are up to on their weird compound in Kennebunkport. And also in Los Angeles. And so we have a ghost bus tour in Los Angeles, as well as a Hollywood Boulevard tour. And then we're on Maui, on Lahaina, at Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii. Nice. The thing is, and then San Juan in Puerto Rico, Old San Juan in Puerto Rico. We do.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the reason that they started working on these, destinations that are, when you talk about Hawaii or Puerto Rico, is because number one, nobody was doing anything there, and we knew there were cool stories and great, amazing history.
Oh yeah.
And number two, it can run all year round. So when you're in Wisconsin, right now we're in July. It's a great time to be here. Come around January, I'm thinking less and less about Wisconsin. I'm thinking more and more about sunny places. And so you need, right. And the reason and so you need to have a business that can run year round. That you can, so the idea was we need to find other cities, that, you can run all the time so we can make it a real business. And that's kind of did that in the past few years. And so now we have 20 some cities. And New Orleans. So we're just going to have a French Quarter tour that starts next week.
Big Easy. I was going to say, you got to have New Orleans.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right. So that's just, New Orleans, I didn't want to go into, at first because it was so saturated, but then ended up with a great opportunity with, a great, just have a great manager and leader out there. And so kind of the opportunity kind of fell into the lap, the American Ghost Walk's lap, and wanted to take advantage of a really, like a really experienced, tour guide and manager. And so now we've got a great team down there, and then we're just starting in the French Quarter. So I'm really, really excited about that. And it's all at AmericanGhostWalks.com, including a new paranormal story that comes up every week. And we've got, 100 on there right now about all our various destinations, as well as like a paranormal potpourri of, interesting stories and stuff. But so we have a newsletter that comes out every week, where we delve into paranormal from each of the locations and ghost stories, or it might be ghost stories. It might be the, Bermuda Triangle, or, it could be UFOs.
Sure. And
so you can find that all at AmericanGhostWalks.com.
Yeah. And just really quickly. So what does the tour include? You have a tour and you go to the sites. Is there anything else you kind of want to mention that makes you guys special or a little different from other tours?
Well, I think what makes us special from other tours is that we don't make anything up. And
yes.
Well, we take it seriously. So that to me, it's not fun if I know somebody's making something up or using a story that I know is untrue. Right. And I've been in a lot of tours that do it. Like it takes me out, because if I wanted fiction, I go to the movies, and there's a lot of great movies I want to see.
Yeah.
And so to me, number one, we have rules about how we design the tours, where that everything has to have a bibliography. What book do we find it in? What interview did this happen with who?
Nice.
Where do we find each story? And so we connect it together, number one, like that. And then number two, we also don't shy away from if people want to do some paranormal investigation. So we have some things that are specifically for paranormal investigation. Last week we ran something in Woodstock, Illinois, where they filmed the Groundhog Day, and actually the bed and breakfast where Bill Murray slept in, and they played "I Got You, Babe" by Sonny and Cher every morning.
I Got You, Babe.
Yeah. That place has a whole bunch of ghost stories. So we did a paranormal investigation and tour of it last week. Like I said, in Lincoln Park, we do a haunted history tour that also includes a bunch of elements of paranormal investigation. We'll be doing that on Hollywood Boulevard this Saturday night, in front of the old Warner Pacific Theater. And so I think part of it is, and we have people that take it seriously. Like, it's not just actors that are running it. It's not gonna be like your high school drama club doing the ghost tour. It's
right.
I mean, some of the tour guides like to dress up and get into a character and everything, but it's not going to be one of those things where this person is just acting out in front of you. It's going to be like, let me tell you about this really cool story here and the history and everything. And everybody gives it their own personal spin, and everybody who's one of our guides is into this and interested. And that's not like a prerequisite to work for us, but, it's great storytellers that also have a passion for it that I think sets us apart. So does that mean I got to pay people? Does that mean I have to pay people more than something that you're like, oh yeah, but they're worth every penny. They're worth every penny.
Yes.
And so I think people find that with our company, they have a more fun experience because we're not just going through the motions.
Yeah, you have sold me, Mike. You are. I'm definitely going on a tour. I'm going to convince my wife to go to Maui. I bet she'll be up for that. Or Puerto Rico.
Lahaina's, San Juan tour is a lot of fun.
So, Mike, you are. I love it. You're an interesting guy. I would love to have you on again if you could spare the time. Sure. That would be awesome. So many great stories. We always end our podcast by saying, tell your ghost we say hi. So say hi to your ghost. And then we always say, stay spooky. So again, thank you so much, Mike. Stay spooky. We will talk later.
All right. Thanks, John. Stay spooky yourself.
Bye-bye.